You're listening to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast, episode 196. In response to a review of this show saying I should keep politics and social commentary out of the podcast, I share why fitness and veganism are, and always will be, inherently political.
Welcome to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast. Myth-busting and evidence-based advice to help you kick butt with your health and fitness on a vegan diet. Here's your host, Karina Inkster.
Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Karina, your go-to no BS vegan fitness and nutrition coach. Thanks so much for joining me today. My team and I have some exciting things coming up, including a live recording of our 200th podcast episode, which also happens to correspond with my birthday. So stay tuned for more details on that soon. And we've just updated our free vegan resources at karinainkster.com/resources, where you can get free access, no email sign-up required, to 9 of our best tools and resources, including a vegan-specific protein calculator, soy myths busted once and for all, and a vegan strength training starter kit. So you can access all those at karinainkster.com/resources. Today's episode is based on an article that I worked on for about 3 months that was just published. It includes contributions from several podcast guests and other experts in fitness and veganism. And I'll link directly to the article at our show notes, nobullshitvegan.com/196. So, fitness, veganism, and social justice. Why politics belong in plant-based health. Here's the review that I received recently of this podcast, which was 3 out of 5 stars, by the way. Very good, but slips into social commentary is the headline. And the review says, I appreciate the fitness and vegan info for athletes. I do not listen to this show to get an earful of social or political commentary from host or guests. Do you really think everyone who listens agrees with where you fall on that spectrum? Or are we continuing assumptions and stereotypes? Here is a suggestion. Stick to the topic of your podcast and hold your opinions on the state of politics. Thank you. Now, I'm not sure which episode or guest this listener had in mind, but their comment got me thinking. My podcast and my entire business is centered around fitness and veganism, both of which inherently involve social commentary and politics. So let's start with, what is politics? For the purpose of the article I wrote, and for the purpose of this episode, politics refers to the distribution, use, and consequences of power. Or, from the Oxford Learner's Dictionary, the activities involved in getting and using power in public life and being able to influence decisions that affect a country or a society. So this includes formal power structures, decision-making in groups, the distribution of resources or status, and how power is chosen. Social commentary and politics are interconnected. The podcast review mentions both social commentary and politics, and they both involve critiquing, shaping, and influencing societal structures, norms, and power dynamics. Social commentary points out what's not working, and it pushes for change, while politics is how these changes actually get made. For example, highlighting the lack of accessible exercise facilities for individuals with disabilities is social commentary, and it can push for stronger accessibility laws and funding for adaptive fitness programs, which is politics. Another example, investigative journalism exposing greenwashing in the animal agriculture industry is social commentary and can lead to regulatory actions like enforcing stricter labeling requirements or incentivizing plant-based alternatives, which is politics. Believing that politics has no place in fitness or veganism is actually itself a political position. Dr. Robert Hackett is a political scientist, retired professor of communication at Simon Fraser University, and the author of a number of books and articles on politics, media, and social movements. And side note, he also happens to be my dad. He argues that believing politics has no place in my podcast is in itself a political stance, and says, quote, claims that nutrition and fitness, like art and sports, should be kept free of politics are themselves highly political. Almost all human activities have aspects that are political, in the broad sense of challenging, reinforcing, or simply acquiescing in relations of power. To take a straightforward example, the international boycott of white South African sporting teams was an effective factor in ending the racist apartheid regime in the 1990s. Those who argued against the boycott on grounds of keeping politics out of sports were in effect supporting apartheid. Similarly, to suggest that the context, consequences, and values embedded in fitness and nutrition practices be ignored in discussing them is to undermine the awareness needed to make ethical choices. Justice Roe Williams, Rock Rashan, and Lawrence Koval co-authored the book Deconstructing the Fitness Industrial Complex: How to Resist, Disrupt, and Reclaim What It Means to Be Fit in American Culture. I had the opportunity to speak with Justice on my podcast about how the fitness industry upholds systems of oppression and how marginalized communities can reclaim fitness spaces. By the way, I'm linking to all of the podcast episodes I'm mentioning here in our show notes, nobullshitvegan.com/196. The fitness industrial complex uplifts some bodies while denigrating others. Bodies that are black, brown, queer, trans, poor, fat, and disabled. Bodies that don't conform, that resist and disrupt, are excluded from being fit. Koval writes, one of the ways the fitness industrial complex maintains its power is by convincing people that gyms and fitness spaces are inherently apolitical and exist separate from the rest of our public and private lives. In reality, they are spaces where ideas of body citizenship in a white supremacist system are constructed and played out. Much like in fitness, there's no separating veganism from politics. Robert Hackett says, veganism raises a profound philosophical question. What constitutes a healthy and ethical life? That question is also inextricably political. So whether we realize it or not, veganism is a political act that challenges entrenched systems of power, including those that exploit animals, workers, and the environment for profit. Ignoring power dynamics and ethical implications within fitness and veganism perpetuates existing inequalities in these spaces. It also hinders our ability to move toward more ethical and more inclusive options. Here's why and how fitness is inherently political. Kettlebell instructor and strength and nutrition coach Damali Fraser says, fitness is deeply political because it is inextricably linked to cultural, social, and economic systems that shape our understanding of bodies and their value. Those who don't understand that need to pause to consider who gets to define fitness. What fitness looks like is influenced by historical and systemic forces such as colonialism, capitalism, and patriarchy. For example, mainstream fitness ideals often center thin, white, able-bodied standards, marginalizing those who exist outside these norms. Access to fitness resources like safe spaces, time, and equipment is also unequally distributed, reflecting larger societal inequities. Additionally, the policing of bodies, particularly those of marginalized communities, underscores how fitness is not just personal, but a site of power, privilege, and resistance. In episode 192 of my podcast, Damali and I discussed inclusive fitness, so check that out if you haven't already. Marilyn Preston, journalist, fitness coach, and creator of an Emmy-winning sport and fitness TV series, experienced something similar to the podcast review I got back in 2013. Peg, a reader of Preston's newspaper column, wrote in, I have been a faithful reader of your column. I just wanted you to know that I am done reading your column. Yup, never again. When you started making your column into a forum for your political opinions, which, by the way, I do not agree with, you changed your focus. I am no longer interested in your column. So why did Preston include politics in her column? She writes, politics affect lifestyle, and my readers, now minus Peg, are interested in living happier, healthier, less stressful lives. And she adds, it's much easier to be strong and fit if we live in a country that supports equal sports opportunities for women, Title IX, community health centers, neighborhood gardens, nutritious school lunches, clean air and water, and bike lanes. Living a healthy lifestyle is all about personal choices, but in our country, the personal and the political collide. You used to be able to smoke anywhere, and now you can't. Should sugary colas be taxed? Should texting while driving be banned? I can't get into the politics of health every week, but I can't ignore it altogether, that's for sure. Now, 12 years later, in 2025, we're apparently still having the same conversation, and clearly there are still plenty of pegs out there who would prefer that we didn't. Body politics, identity, and social dynamics in fitness. You probably know this if you've listened to the show for any amount of time, but I operate in the corner of the fitness industry that challenges unrealistic, harmful beauty standards. We need to push back against very narrow definitions, which have roots in patriarchy and racism, of what fit and healthy bodies look like. Fitness coach Ren Jones has appeared in multiple episodes of this show, where we've dug into racism inherent in the fitness industry. In episode 109, we discussed how fitness is rooted in patriarchy, and we explored systemic barriers that affect marginalized communities. And in episode 77, we examined racial disparities within fitness, including how Black and brown bodies are underrepresented in mainstream fitness. As a society, we still tend to see fitness through a very narrow lens, mainly as a tool for losing weight. I remember very clearly when, more than a decade ago, a woman approached me in a commercial gym and said, "You don't need to be here, you're already skinny." Now, I'm sure she was joking and trying to be funny, but we need to normalize engaging in intentional movement for non-weight, non-size reasons, which could include mental health, social connection, skill development, maintaining independence in later life, and a lot more. Diet culture puts weight loss at the forefront of fitness, and it values thinness and appearance over physical and mental health. It tells us not only that there is something wrong with our bodies if we don't match this ideal, but that it's our fault and that we should fix our bodies with diet and exercise. Diet culture tells us that lean bodies are healthy bodies, that they are the correct body size, and that they have higher moral value than larger bodies, reinforcing harmful societal biases and stigmatizing larger bodies. Much of the work my coaching team and I engage in with our clients, our online audience, and this podcast is centered around critiquing diet culture and recognizing our biases, which is social commentary, and then supporting systemic change, which is politics. Rigid expectations around body size and appearance extend beyond weight loss and affect the ways we think different genders should engage with fitness. Women saying, "Well, I don't want to get too bulky from lifting weights," or men shying away from participating in yoga, Pilates, or barre classes, perpetuate traditional gender roles. Fitness messaging is often divided along traditional gender lines, such as toning for women and bulking for men. Many women and non-binary individuals feel unsafe or unwelcome in gyms due to harassment or a hypermasculine culture. Fortunately, more and more people are recognizing these issues, and they're working to reshape fitness into a tool for activism rather than exclusion. Fitness can empower marginalized groups to reclaim their bodies and spaces via body positivity and body neutrality movements, queer inclusive gyms, and fitness programs designed for communities historically excluded from mainstream narratives. Accessibility and structural barriers. Staying active isn't just about motivation. It's also about access. Gym memberships, fitness coaching, and equipment are cost prohibitive for many folks. Even home workouts aren't always an option if space or equipment is out of reach. Where you live also has a huge impact on fitness. Public parks, walking trails, and community centers provide free spaces to move, but they're often underfunded or unavailable in lower income neighborhoods. City planning plays a role too. Some places are built with walking and biking in mind, while others make cars the only realistic option. If your environment doesn't support movement, staying active becomes that much more difficult. Even access to green spaces isn't equal. Wealthier neighborhoods tend to have more parks and well-maintained recreational areas, while lower income communities are often left with fewer safe, inviting places to exercise. Power, influence, and industry. The fitness industry often markets itself as a path to health and self-improvement, but behind the scenes, corporate and government agendas shape who has access to fitness. The fitness industrial complex thrives on consumerism, encouraging people to buy supplements, trendy apparel, and expensive equipment under the guise of self-care. While physical movement itself is free, the industry profits by making people feel like they need to spend money to do fitness the right way, usually prioritizing sales over genuine well-being. Government policies also play a major role in shaping fitness access. Decisions around education, urban planning, and healthcare determine whether people have opportunities to move. School curricula that cut physical education, cities designed for cars over walking or biking, and healthcare systems that fail to integrate movement into preventative care all create systemic barriers that can't be solved with individual willpower alone. Despite these structural issues, fitness is still framed as a matter of personal responsibility. The dominant narrative tells us that anyone can be active if they just try hard enough, which, of course, ignores real-life obstacles like long work hours, caregiving duties, or a lack of safe, accessible spaces to move. Here's how and why veganism is inherently political. Veganism is a commitment to fairness and sustainability that extends far beyond food. It questions the systems we've been taught to accept, how we treat animals, who controls our food, and who gets access to healthy, sustainable options. It pushes back against exploitative industries and asks tough questions about justice, privilege, and the environment. We, in my vegan fitness and nutrition coaching practice, critique many aspects of the conventional, non-vegan approach to nutrition, as well as aspects of the vegan movement itself, which is all social commentary. For example, check out episode 70, which is an episode critiquing PETA. We also support systemic changes like the recent Canadian government's food guide, which removed meat and dairy as food groups and is our country's first food guide to be published without industry influence. So all this is politics. Dr. Annalise Weiler is an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Victoria. Her research explores workers' rights and environmental health, agricultural industry lobbying, and how everyday people are fighting for a more livable world. She says, veganism is inherently political because factory farms and slaughterhouses are driven by the logic of profit. In a world that broadly sees animal abuse as ethically unacceptable, why do we produce eggs by raising hens in filthy, overcrowded conditions and cull 6.5 billion day-old male chicks each year? Simply put, because it's cost-effective. Business ownership in the animal agriculture industry is highly concentrated, which means that a small number of wealthy corporations hold a lot of political sway. The meat, egg, and dairy industries have been successful at pushing governments for laws that prevent transparency and accountability for animal welfare, and that allow businesses to pollute our air, water, and climate with few consequences. Beyond their political power, the mainstream animal agriculture industry also holds a lot of cultural power. For example, the dairy industry has convinced many consumers that dairy is essential for human health and that dairy cows live pleasant lives in old-fashioned red barns. This cultural power is especially evident in the way vegans are widely dismissed and ridiculed for questioning whether factory farms reflect the values we want to practice as a society. At our show notes, nobullshitvegan.com/196, check out my podcast conversation with Dr. Weiler on workers' rights, environmental health, veganism, and how we can fight for a more livable world. Ethics, intersectionality, and social justice. Intersectional veganism recognizes that different forms of oppression are interconnected and impact both animals and humans. We can't make veganism truly inclusive and accessible if we don't also address racism, sexism, and ableism. Here are some ways veganism ties into other social justice issues. Food scarcity. Animal agriculture uses huge amounts of grain and water that could be feeding people instead of livestock, worsening food scarcity in vulnerable regions. Workers' rights. Many workers endure harsh, exploitative conditions in slaughterhouses and factory farms. Veganism challenges industries that profit from both animal and worker exploitation. Environmental impacts. The harmful effects of animal agriculture, like water and air pollution, often disproportionately impact low-income and marginalized communities living near factory farms. Food access. Food deserts, affordability, and systemic barriers often make it challenging for people to access plant-based options, particularly in lower-income areas. Racial equity within veganism. I spoke with Alyssa Nash and Gigi Carter on my podcast a while back about the growing number of Black vegans and how veganism can and should extend its compassion to human rights. They emphasized that promoting veganism within Black communities isn't just about diet. It should also address health disparities, cultural representation, and systemic barriers. Culture, health, and social norms. Many cultures have long-standing practices involving animal consumption, and veganism can feel like a rejection of heritage rather than an evolution of ethical values. How do we navigate respect for tradition while considering changing perspectives on sustainability and animal rights? For one answer, look to Cuban cookbook author Raydel Hernandez. He keeps Cuban traditions alive by veganizing his family's classic recipes, especially his grandma's dishes, so he can stay true to his culture while living a plant-based lifestyle. He focuses on keeping the flavor and soul of Cuban food, just without animal products. And at our show notes, nobullshitvegan.com/196, check out my podcast episode with Raydel. We vegans often get pushback in social contexts simply because we don't follow the norm. Eating animals is so ingrained that questioning it makes people uncomfortable. It forces them to reflect on their own role in the system. And that discomfort can turn into stigma, making veganism seem extreme when it's really just about aligning our actions with our values. While ethics are often the main reason for going vegan, and it certainly was for me, health also plays a part for many of us. Heavy in animal products, the standard diet in our area of the world contributes to many chronic diseases, driving up healthcare costs. A shift toward mostly whole food, plant-based eating could help lower rates of heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. Environmental and economic impacts of veganism. One of the most significant environmental arguments in favor of veganism is its potential to mitigate climate change. Animal agriculture is a leading contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, and biodiversity loss. By reducing the demand for animal products, we vegans force governments and corporations to confront the environmental consequences of traditional food production and to consider more sustainable alternatives. Raising animals for food requires vast amounts of land, water, and energy, which could be allocated more efficiently to plant-based food production. The disproportionate use of these resources raises questions about environmental justice, as many regions suffer from food and water scarcity, while agricultural systems prioritize meat and dairy production. A shift toward plant-based eating presents an opportunity to redistribute resources more equitably and alleviate some of the environmental burdens associated with industrial agriculture. Chemical engineer and data scientist Dr. Kartik Shaker presents a compelling technological argument against animal agriculture in episode 114 of this podcast. He explains that using animals for food production is inherently inefficient and outdated. We're constantly constrained by their biological limitations that hinder scalability and sustainability. Shaker notes that plant-based alternatives not only have the potential to surpass animal products in taste, cost, and nutrition, but also offer a more efficient and ethical approach to food production. This is yet another example of the political dimensions of veganism, as it challenges entrenched systems and advocates for a shift toward more sustainable and equitable food practices. In our latest podcast episode, number 195, agrologist Corey Davis joined me to unpack the environmental toll of animal agriculture. Did you know it takes 90 times more land to produce a pound of beef than it does to produce a pound of tofu? Plant-based food systems have enormous potential to reduce emissions, reclaim land, and restore ecosystems. Beyond environmental concerns, veganism also challenges entrenched economic power structures. The meat, dairy, leather, and pharmaceutical industries are multi-billion-dollar enterprises that wield substantial economic and political influence. The vegan movement threatens their dominance by reducing consumer demand and pushing for legislative changes that favor plant-based alternatives. Government subsidies further entrench animal agriculture's power, making it difficult for plant-based alternatives to compete on a level playing field. Governments worldwide allocate significant taxpayer funds to support livestock farming, reinforcing an unsustainable food system. Veganism critiques this practice, which is social commentary, advocating for policy changes that redirect subsidies toward more environmentally and socially responsible food production methods, which is politics. So let's put this all together. Veganism and fitness are both personal choices, but they're also shaped by and push back against larger systems of power. Both call out the inequalities baked into our culture, like questioning who gets to be seen as fit, or challenging industries that profit from animal exploitation. Pretending veganism and fitness aren't political just maintains the status quo for those already in power. Talking about the politics behind what we eat and how we move helps us create spaces that are more fair, inclusive, and aligned with our values. Why would anyone want to leave that out of the conversation? Thank you for tuning in today. Access our show notes at nobullshitvegan.com/196 to connect with me and to get links to all the podcast episodes I mentioned today. And I would love to hear from you. At the same link, nobullshitvegan.com/196, you'll see a Get in Touch link. Send me a line with your thoughts. Are there points you disagree with? Topics that resonated with you? Things I've missed? Random thoughts on life? Drop me a line. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to the No Bullshit Vegan podcast at nobullshitvegan.com.